This is Space Minds by SpaceNews. In this episode of Space Minds, host David Ariosto speaks with Juan Alonso, CTO and co-founder of Luminary Cloud and professor at Stanford University, about the rapid transformation underway in aerospace engineering. But first, a word from our sponsor, Voyager Technologies. The future of commercial space is here, a space station designed from day one to support science, national security, commercial R&D, and long-duration human presence without compromise. Led by Voyager Technologies, Starlab will provide a seamless transition from the ISS into the new commercial era.
Juan Alonso, you are the founder and director of the Aerospace Design Laboratory and also the co-founder and CTO of Luminary Cloud. It's so great to have you on the program.
It's a real pleasure to be with you, David.
Yeah, and maybe just to start us off, to kind of give the audience who aren't perhaps experts, some of them may be, but perhaps not all of them are experts in computational fluid dynamics and the nature of and the growing sort of need for simulations for analysis and design, and how all this sort of plays into performance and IP issues and adaptation and all the mountain of things that you're doing over there at Luminary and Stanford more broadly. Give us a little bit of a primer in terms of what Luminary is, what you do, what's the nature of computational fluid dynamics, and kind of how it's changing. All this is, I realize there's a lot to kind of wrap in together, but maybe let's start with Luminary. What is that?
Yeah, Luminary is a company that was created to give customers the end-to-end capability to generate physics AI models. So these are models of the physical world, like computational fluid dynamics, that can be way faster and just as accurate as the models we've been using for a long, long time. So you asked about computational fluid dynamics. Computational fluid dynamics is nothing but solving the equations of how the air flows around, let's say, a rocket during launch, for example, or inside a rocket engine or a thruster, as we'll talk about later today. How to understand all of that through numerical simulation inside of a computer. So, of course, that's had tremendous impact in our industry for a very, very long time. But frankly, at Luminary, we believe that it's slowing down the process, the fact that those simulations take a very long time to complete. So at Luminary, we're taking a lot of those simulations, so generating tremendous amount of data very quickly. And then we're turning those simulations through what we call physics AI into models that are just as accurate, but way, way faster. Yeah. And eventually, the objective of the company is simply to accelerate design and certification processes such that we can deploy much more capable systems more quickly, so we can react faster to all kinds of commercial and defense threats, so on and so forth. So
I think this is why I found your company so interesting, is that it almost like you're a little bit of the tip of the spear here in terms of this new paradigm shift that we're all kind of looking at in terms of the nexus between AI, machine learning, some of these new maybe nanofabrication techniques that are coming online. And all of this promises an iterative approach, especially when it comes to aerospace, that is unlike anything we've ever seen before. And I find it interesting in terms of your perspectives, especially because there's this long history of academia, the commercial sector, particularly defense, all sort of working together. And I want to explore that a little bit more, and sort of like the ecosystem that it takes to kind of create these types of things. Because on the one hand, we have this brand new, brave new era in terms of this nexus of all these really exciting new technologies. On the other hand, this is sort of a tried and true recipe in terms of advancements throughout the years.
Right.
Is that fair?
I think that's a fair characterization. And what I would say is that engineering has always been a data-driven discipline. So, from the early days of splines, we would put data points that we acquire in some way and just sort of fit models through them with either a straight or a curved line. It's just over the last 10 years, the amount and availability of data has exploded. So It's nothing like what we used to be able to do before. And at the same time, the world of AI, not for the physical world, but for other applications that sort of taken the world by storm, has actually contributed, together with the revolution of machine learning, methods that are very, very different than the methods we used to do to create models. So all of that put together, some of it coming from, early work in academia, with some ideas of what might be possible. Some of it coming from leading companies trying to use these types of methods and trying to figure out, how they might be incorporated into the design process. Some of it coming from collaboration with startups like us, with large companies like Northrop Grumman, is sort of just taking the world by storm. And really, it's kind of like the ability to query the physical world and say, how is this rocket going to perform?
Right.
And within a second or two, having answers to those questions when we
Does
would
that
have
give you
normally
pause?
waited 10 to 12 hours to just do that, right? So,
Does that give you pause though? Because I mean, in the sense of a increased reliance on computational simulations that are born off essentially algorithmic decision making that informs, how design and processes are sort of undertaken. I mean, is there a part of you that kind of thinks
yes.
we might have a little bit too much reliance on this going forward? I mean, yes, the speed is remarkable, and the level of data and the way you can scrutinize sort of the individual sort of at almost at atomic levels, frankly, in terms of how um, computational and fluid dynamics are sort of behaving in terms of a rocket engine or hypersonic vehicles, and yet. Is there a like is there
Yeah.
a value here in sort of the old way of doing things as well?
So, over the last 15 years, numerical simulation and all kinds of high performance computing strategies have gone a long way to make the simulations more and more accurate. But no
Mm.
simulation is perfect. In fact, sometimes when we do simulations, we miss certain things in the real world. So we always know that while simulation is taking an ever increasing role in the design of any commercial space product, for example, we do know that often we have to do some tests in order to verify that what the simulations have predicted is quite all right, and it's in line with what we had thought the system was going to do. Now, the physics AI revolution takes it to a next level by adding more and more and more simulation data, but also enabling you to bring in experimental data and sort of assimilate all that data into a single model so you can have something that is actually better than simulation alone, right? And it's more credible. And it gives you more confidence on the results that you're predicting and the designs that you're going to pursue. So yes, I'm always concerned about the accuracy, the errors, and the uncertainties of simulation by itself. But I'm very hopeful that as we go forward, the new paradigm is allowing us to combine various different sources of data in order to decrease those risks.
What about the physicality of the actual location as well? So, in sort of this modern era, in terms of all the data we have and ability to exchange information, the fact we're doing this podcast on a Zoom call, it's just, the world has shrunk quite a bit, and yet there still seems a certain primacy of ecosystems in terms of a regional aspect. I mean, you see this with Taiwan and Taipei being sort of this global leader in semiconductor manufacturing and producing some of these advanced chips. And I think part of the reason for that is just the proximity of talent that are all along sort of the pipeline chain. And I wonder if you could do this outside of Silicon Valley. I guess is maybe the question mark that I have. I mean, do you see these things cropping up in a sort of the siloed effect that comes together in terms of the broader, the broader ecosystem that is the global internet?
Mhm.
Or, do coffee shops matter? Do physical meetings matter? Do like the,
Yeah.
the proximity of being in the same time zone matters in terms of what you can do as a startup at Luminary and push the envelope and really, get us to that kind of next iteration of where we're going.
Yeah, so I have to say that that's an extremely interesting and insightful question, David. I have to say Silicon Valley is a unique place.
Mm.
It's a unique physical place where talent does come together. And make no mistake about it, to make these sort of giant leaps in sort of capability and design of space systems, for example. What ends up happening is that you do have to have some of the most interesting, amazing, and interdisciplinary teams, from cloud computing to GPU computing to physical analysis, right, to computer security, so to the management of very large amounts of data, visualization, so on and so forth. All those disciplines have to come together. And the good thing about Silicon Valley is that you have some of those people already, but make no mistake about it, there are there's talent that is necessary to realize this vision that lives elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I think the internet revolution, the Zoom revolution, as we call it, has enabled us to bring in those people into an already very competent team in order to realize these types of vision. But talent is global. There's no
Yeah.
question about it.
And and the talent is global. Talent also kind of comes with similar stories. I can't tell you how many people that I've heard that have sort of been inspired to get into aerospace and design and engineering by virtue of their experiences that they might have had in their childhood. And I know you did a little homework. I mean, I know you wanted to be an astronaut. I know your father worked in aerospace, I think in Iberia in Spain.
Yes, yes,
And
correct.
like there were these indelible imprints that are made at a young age, and I wonder if you could kind
100%.
of walk me through that a little bit. Like
Well, I'll tell you, I used to joke with people, particularly my students, that I always wanted to be an astronaut since a young child. I devoured, books about space and everything else. But I do tell people that at a
give
sweet
me
age of
one of the
age,
books before you continue. Give me one of the books that you devoured at an early
oh,
age. Because a lot
well,
of
a lot of Asimov related things, but
okay.
a lot of pictures of books about the US space program, about the competition with the Soviet Union at the time. So I was a young kid in the 70s, right? So and all these interesting, well, the Jules Verne novels, I mean, I can begin. I have just a very long collection, and my mother, to her credit, indulged me in a lot of these things and bought me a different book every week.
No, I
But
don't
what
want
I
to give
told
too much
people,
credit to your father here. So,
yes, well, my dad, of course, worked for an airline company, so he was not a pilot, but he was in charge of organizing all of the scheduling for the airline. And we had lots of friends who were pilots. So as a child, at 6 or 7 years old, I would fly back from the Dominican Republic, where I was born, to Spain, where my parents were from, in the cockpit of a 747. That's not allowed anymore, but as you can imagine, as a child who loved these machines, it was just transformative. But I do tell people that at the sweet age of age, 8 years old, I realized that A, I wore glasses, and B, I lived in a country without a space program. So I had to do something else. And the next best thing was to try to design these systems.
isn't that so interesting though? I mean, that was the era then, but now I mean, you have dozens of space programs all around the globe,
You
and
do.
access to orbit is so much more accessible and so much
Yeah,
cheaper. If not for like homegrown launch systems, then it is for like the payload shares that you see on like a Falcon 9
correct.
and the rest of it. And so it just, it does strike me as that we're kind of at the onset of this new age, almost factory floor on orbit, in which you have all of these new
Completely.
technologies, and yet you mentioned during the course of that last answer the Soviet Union and the first
Mhm.
space race, and like the sense of security that a lot of this has been underpinned by, and that's been replaced in many ways by this rival or potential rival with Beijing. And I wonder, in terms of the work that you're doing in terms of defense, in the world of hypersonics, and this is a technology that was pioneered in the United
Mm.
States, but has in many ways been leapfrogged by those in Beijing, and we see this on the battlefields in Russia and Ukraine, and the Iranians are developing these weapons as well as the North Koreans, and it strikes me as that in order to maybe not catch up, but in order to sort of push the envelope faster in terms of not only the development of these technologies but responses,
Yeah.
the nature of computational simulations for analysis and design is paramount in all of this.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you can speak to that a bit.
So you touch on many good subjects. So first of all, we are much closer to space than anybody ever was at my age when I was a child, and even probably your age when you were a child, in the sense that our students build satellites, put them in orbit, and operate them from the building we're in, right? That's enabled people to do lots of more interesting things and be closer to actually space than just reading books, et cetera, et cetera. Now, on the topic of how do we feel systems in space, hypersonics, or anything else much more quickly than the competition, with national defense implications, of course, but many other implications, it is a race. There is no question. People have understood the value of these systems, and when they're deployed, the advantages that they confer. And therefore, we need to go into the possibility of designing these systems more intelligent, more quickly. by examining lots of different alternatives in finite time or in the same amount of time, right? And that's what simulation is actually enabling. And frankly, that's what physics AI is enabling. And hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about our collaboration with Northrop Grumman, but that's been an example of how you can say, hey, let's take new technologies and rethink how we embed those technologies into existing and new engineering workflows for design and for analysis of these types of systems. And let's try to figure out how we explore much more vast design spaces and come up with better solutions more quickly. And that's how we continuously leapfrog the competition or just get ahead so much that they cannot leapfrog us again, right? So,
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that collaboration with Northrop Grumman. Give us sort of the lay of the land here.
Well, so, as we mentioned, Luminary is trying to be the first company that provides end-to-end capabilities for what we call physics AI. And we haven't talked very much about that, but let me say something about it. This is the idea of generating a lot of data through numerical simulation, but also absorbing it or including it from physical testing, right? Now you have all this data, you need to create or train a model, as we call it in the sort of AI parlance, right? Once you have the model, that model is there for you, an engineer, or for the entire organization to query. So give it another design and have it tell you how well that design actually performs instantly, right? So that's what physics AI is bringing. So Luminary is trying to do the end-to-end capability and be the first company to do so with significant accuracy so customers can actually trust the results. So of course,
sorry, go ahead, please.
No, please.
Well, give us some use cases. Give some use cases in terms of
Yes. So, Northrop Grumman is going to be one, which I'll talk more about in the space side, which I think your listeners will be much more interested in. But in fact, we've worked with customers in the aerospace industry, looking at aircraft. We are looking at all kinds of processes in industrial manufacturing. We're looking at all kinds of turbo machinery problems, automotive, so on and so forth. So in our case with Northrop, well, go ahead if you wanted to ask something.
No, please. I was just thinking when you said that, I was actually thinking that it sort of dawned on me that as we talk about aerospace and we talk about commercial space and we talk about the airline industry even, and it advances in things like scramjets and others that are sort of these advanced concepts, the nature, almost the line between what is orbital technology and what is atmospheric technology starting to blur a little bit in terms of some of these technologies. I mean, clearly these are distinct environments, so not to take anything away from that. And yet, like I hate to keep using this word, but the ecosystems that surround both are a little bit more blurred than they used to be. Is that your
I would say it's a good observation because the fundamentals of all these aerospace systems, be it on the one side, lower speed commercial aviation to high speed hypersonics to access to space type systems, or even reentry from space, the physical fundamentals are very similar. They're commonly shared among all those different applications. Of course, the details are a little bit different. But if you had these wonderful capabilities to ask a question and get an immediate answer as to how a system would perform without ever building it, and you could do this accurately and quickly, now you can see that if you can do it for one discipline, you can probably do it for another discipline with slightly different physical models. So yes, the line is being blurred, and it is because it all comes down to physics.
And then
it's
when we
very
talk
similar
about
physics.
when we think about like the life cycle of new technologies and the sort of the development time it takes to kind of bring product from conception to market. And this is, it's really interesting in terms of your academic background because, academics have a reputation for being at sort of the forefront of the vanguard of technologies that may or may not be commercial, but somehow they always kind of find their way into the commercial space eventually. And there's plenty of exceptions on both sides. But kind of when you look at this, like what's next in terms of like the biggest untapped opportunities relative to the time that it usually takes to bring these to bear? Because it seems to me and to pretty many other folks, it seems that we are just on the precipice of this explosion of new technologies that comes online at unprecedented speeds.
I mean, I hate to sound trite, but I've been mentioning it. We believe that the data revolution that leads to the physical or physics AI revolution it's what's going to take the engineering world by storm. Um, people don't quite understand just yet how much this is going to impact the way in which we design these systems.
Yeah.
It's having immediate information about a hypothetical system you might want to design. It's looking at hundreds of different alternatives that you couldn't have thought about before and finding truly an answer that is way better than anything that you had done before. It is really important that we kind of share the word with people that these types of methods and systems are actually becoming available as we speak. There's a true revolution happening because we want companies who, by the way, are the experts in doing the designs of the types of systems that they actually work on. We want those companies to be the ones who think about how they best embed these new tools into their existing capabilities in order to grossly and greatly accelerate the processes that they've been following. And that takes some, I think, innovative thinkers. It's easy to say, hey, I've been doing this for 25 years, so let me just make it 10% faster rather than reworking and rethinking how I'm going to make it 10 times faster, right? So that's why we had such a great collaboration with Northrop Grumman. I have to say, it was just lovely to have some really advanced thinkers that want to spend a bit of time sort of prototyping how they might embed these new technologies into their systems.
I don't want to say the skeptic in me, but
Mhm.
the individual who's not the engineer also
Right.
looks at this and says, hey, the engineering is much better. The product design and development is
Yeah.
much faster. The nature of competition in terms of, homegrown institutions and companies on a global competition scale is important and is better. But I
Yeah.
wonder from a policymaker perspective, from a cultural
Mhm.
perspective, from a regulatory perspective, how all this keeps pace with the kind of advances and the systems that are moving at warp speed. And like that's a question sort of for the broader electorate and the broader sort of the systems by which we all sort of
Mhm.
live under. But in the sense of how quickly, it's not only just the questions of like, are humans in the loop in terms of some of these
Yeah.
defense systems, which I think I have real questions about long term,
Sure.
given how short the time span of the response time is with hypersonics. But it's also like the broader institutions can they handle? Can they keep pace?
Yeah.
Do we have a system of society that is
I,
capable of adaptation?
I have to say that when I was younger and more naive, I used to think that these systems may replace humans altogether, and you just say, "Hey, give me a new, I don't know, rocket launcher that can put this much payload into orbit and is reusable or whatever, and it will come up with a nice design." What I realize is that, the things that we can simulate and the number of alternatives that we can sort of look into is large and getting larger, but still limited. So my vision has always been, and I read this in a major publication last week, the one of Iron Man's Jarvis, which you're probably familiar with. So this is an intelligent sort of capability that is a right-hand person to the designer. And the designer, he or she is sort of trying to figure out, what is the best design, and it's getting alternatives from this machine, and it's sort of rethinking the problem and say, what if you did this, what if you did that, so on and so forth. I think all these methods are still going to be assistance method for very clever engineers and engineering teams that are going to come up with the solutions, but they're going to do so with much higher level of confidence, lower risk, and much quicker time than ever before.
Yeah.
And this is what we're trying to prepare, many of our customers for. It's the fact that these technologies are real. And, I was a skeptic myself, but my first PhD student in this topic finished his doctorate, I think, in 2012. And at the time, we were like, yeah, this is a great technology, but there's never going to be enough data, or the methods are not going to be generalizable. And we're just seeing that is changing. It's changing every day, David. And, it's going to lead to something over the next 5 to 10 years that is just going to be transformative.
Oh, I mean,
Just, yeah. Mhm.
the data itself, I mean, just in terms of how much investment is now being directed towards data centers and just like
Correct.
the nature of like where our physical infrastructure is being oriented in terms
Mhm.
of all this. When you think about that, when you
Mhm.
think about sort of the overwhelming um, Because it is a little bit overwhelming at this point. I mean, there seems to be a little bit of a bottleneck in terms of like actually handling these things, but
Handling it. Mhm.
won't be always, maybe. I don't know. But like, where are the opportunities? I mean, what gets you
Yeah.
most sort of excited in terms of the sort of next iteration of all?
I would say that as you see the world and our competitors, inside and outside the US, right, what you actually see is that most of them are coming up to speed much more quickly on the latest tools, right? So what matters is the knowledge that's been accumulated, which is represented in the form of the data that these companies have. So I think the pioneering companies that are beginning to realize this are going to be the winners. Those who are realizing that most of the value of what they've done is in the data they generated for different alternatives of designs, for a particular design, for certification if you're in the commercial world, so on and so forth. And yes, it's a daunting task because the amount of data that is going to be required to train these physics AI models continues to increase and screens and increase and increase. So somehow you have to manage it. And this has gone from being like, oh, well, this is a bunch of folders that an engineer has in his or her, sort of workstation to something that requires data centers and a data strategy to manage it and to make it accessible, but also to curate it and to feed it to training of models, to retrain, so on and so forth. So when we speak with customers, we actually talk to them, very seriously about the fact that physics AI can do all these things for you, but it's going to be based on data that you generate inside of Luminary or through your own means or through experiments. And somehow you have to really think very seriously about your data organization, your data storage, your data availability, your data controls, right? And various other things. And this is a discipline thing, not just something that can be left to a couple engineers in a particular group. It's a corporate-wide type of efforts.
I think that is a good place to leave it. Juan Alonso,
Mhm.
CTO and co-founder of Luminary Cloud, founder and director of the Aerospace Design Laboratory. It has been an absolute pleasure. I could talk to you for the next couple hours on this stuff. This is just really, really fascinating stuff, and it strikes me as it really is at sort of the vanguard of a lot of where we're going. Thanks so much for having me, for being
It's
for
a
you.
real pleasure to be with you, David. Thank you so much.